All right, here we are at our last in this particular series on evolution regarding the evidence that evolution has actually occurred over the history of planet Earth. The last piece of this puzzle is the evidence contributed by the field of molecular biology. Please do remember that none of these various pieces of evidence that we have been talking about, geography, fossil record, comparative anatomy and embryology, or molecular biology, none of them stands alone. They are all woven together to make an enormous body of evidence that supports the idea of evolutionary theory. Okay? Now, again, the thing about evolutionary theory and the fact that it's based in science is that you should be able to make certain predictions and then be able to test them. That's what science is all about. Okay, so what hypotheses can we make? If evolutionary ideas are so, then if species are descended, in fact, from a common ancestor, evolution predicts that those that are most closely related would share more of their DNA in common with each other, and also their proteins, since protein structure is based upon those DNA instructions, as we learned about before. Conversely, if species were all specially and individually created and not evolved from a common ancestor, you would not expect to find there would be really no particular pattern between genes and relatedness between different species. There wouldn't be any relatedness. Okay, so what is it that we actually find when we examine genes? Do we find a relationship between genes and relatedness or not? Okay, unequivocally, when DNA and proteins are analyzed, we see that more similarities exist in closely related species. So the more closely related organisms are, the more DNA sequences they share in common, and also the more amino acid sequences in their proteins they share in common. They go hand in hand. And that said, even humans and bacteria, for example, very distantly related, but even those at least share some genes and hence proteins in common. Cytochrome C is a protein. We'll actually learn about this a little bit later, but it's a protein used in cellular respiration, and it is found in just about every organism that uses oxygen to create and food to create energy to do respiration. Cytochrome C is in certain bacteria, it's in humans, it's in plants, it's everywhere. Again, suggesting not just common ancestry among a few, but common ancestry way down to the root of the tree of life. So really DNA is perhaps the bottom line in the discussion of the evidence of evolution having occurred. Just as your individual DNA is more similar to your parents than it is to a stranger or even to your cousin or whatever, Darwinian logic predicts the same thing would hold true for different species and a common ancestor. Okay, so some evidence, some more concrete evidence here. Hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in your blood, has been analyzed to death. And among different vertebrates, by analyzing the amino acids in a hemoglobin molecule, what we find is the more closely related the organisms are to each other, we see that the amino acids in the hemoglobin more closely align. For example, a human and a monkey that we would expect to be pretty closely related based on all the other evidence we have. What we find is that in their hemoglobin molecules, there's only 8 amino acids difference. Whereas if we look at a human and a mouse, which are less closely related, we find more differences in the amino acids, 27 different amino acids. But when we look at a human and a chicken, they are even further apart with 45 amino acids difference. Human and a frog, 67 amino acids difference, and a lamprey, which is a very primitive fish, 125 amino acids difference. So that is exactly what Darwin would have predicted, what we would think if evolution, as we understand it, is so. Okay? That was comparing a protein and common to all vertebrates, but also we can, of course, compare DNA, the fundamental genetic code. And closely related species have sequences that are DNA sequences that are much more similar than distantly related species. DNA and proteins both can actually act as a molecular record of evolutionary relationships. What this graph shows is similarity of DNA. Actually, this is showing nucleotide substitution. So this is actually looking at differences in DNA and millions of years ago. For example, humans and kangaroos have more differences in their DNA. And so this implies they were related a very, very long time ago compared to these other pairings. 125 million years ago, we would have shared a common ancestor. But if we look at a human and a cow, that's different. Thanks. That's still pretty long ago that we shared a common ancestor, but it was more recent and we have fewer differences in our DNA. If you look way down here, a horse and a donkey are much more closely related, having very few DNA differences, and were related very, very recently, shared a common ancestor. Okay? So, in conclusion, this common genetic code that we share with all life forms, from the lowliest prokaryote to the most highly evolved mammals, we all share this common genetic code. And that has got to be some pretty persuasive evidence that we are all fundamentally related at a very, very fundamental level. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and there will be more evolution podcasts, but this is done with the evidence for evolution having occurred. Okay? Thanks for watching. See you in the next podcast.